Good morning. Good morning. Again, this is Valerie Leonard. I want to welcome you to this morning's live stream. We're going to talk about 6 steps to building a better funding proposal. As you know, for the past month, we've been focusing on fundraising here in the nonprofit Utopia community. Last week, we talked about making a case for support, and you can go to YouTube and see that video to show you how to write an effective case for support. Other videos that you might find to be helpful are videos on how to do a community needs assessment, and then also looking at the 23 things you need to do before you start any nonprofit process. And that includes starting an organization, strategic planning, or even fundraising. All right. So without further ado, we are going to get started. Okay, so I'm going to share my screen and we'll get into our presentation. Alrighty. As I said before, we're going to talk about the 6 steps to writing a better funding proposal. As I indicated before in our announcement, writing a proposal is a whole lot more than not having typos and having good grammar and telling a good story, right? You have to be able to tell a compelling story, but also be able to provide data that backs it up. So we're going to share with you some tips for writing more effective funding proposals. And before I do that, I want to tell you a little bit about nonprofit Utopia. We're the ideal community for emerging nonprofit leaders, and we've created a safe environment where our members can innovate and talk about things of concern on a day-to-day basis, right? And our mission is to develop the next generation of ethical nonprofit leaders. And we do this through a number of ways. We have monthly meetups, at least we did before COVID-19. We also have online events such as this. We also have webinars. We have classes on demand, share other resources, all of that with the goal of helping our members to develop their leadership skills as they develop their own organizations and make sure those organizations are impactful and are sustainable. And our vision is to strengthen the global nonprofit sector by making sure that we can train up to 50,000 emerging nonprofit leaders around the globe between now and 2033. If you want to learn more about us, please visit nonprofitutopia.com. And you can also join us at nonprofitutopia.mn.co. That's our membership community. And just to give you a little bit of information about myself, I am a consultant focusing on community and organizational development. I founded nonprofit Utopia about 2 years ago, right? And I'm also the host of the Nonprofit Utopia podcast, Nonprofit Utopia live stream, and I am also on staff at University of Illinois, focusing on nonprofit management. I've taught a number of courses in nonprofit management as well as full-day grant writing workshops. I'm also on staff at Roosevelt University teaching courses in social enterprise. As it relates to grant making, I have written grants or provided technical assistance for over $100 million in grants. And I want to share with you some of the stuff that I've learned over the years. So what we'll do is we'll talk about the definition of a proposal. We'll talk about how to prepare it. And then we'll also talk about writing the proposal itself, and then some of the strategies that I think can be of use to you as we go along. All right, so the first thing we want to talk about is conceptualizing your proposal idea. And when I talk about conceptualizing your proposal idea, ideally this would occur long before you're approaching any funders. You will have taken, stock of what's going on in the community, and you'll have a really good sense for what's going on in the community so that you can be responsive, right? So when you conceptualize your proposal idea, that is, coming up with different concepts or different ways or ideas as to how you can approach some of the problems that you see in the community. So, some of the advice that I can share with you, from my own experience in developing proposal ideas over the years, is try to make sure that your idea is not being implemented by others in the same market. And I know in some communities that's downright near impossible. So, if your idea is similar to others, you might consider partnering with folks, or you might look at different ways of approaching the same problem, right? And you also want to make sure that you can get input from key stakeholders so that your programs are relevant. And then you'll also get, support from other people who can make sure that your program moves successfully. All right. And then also is really, really critical too to develop ideas that are within the realm of your own capacity, right? So you have to look at the capacity of what the people around you are able to do, what your organization is able to do, and then develop your proposal concept within those confines. All right, so I have these slides a little backwards. So when you start off, this is assuming that you've already taken a look at what's going on in the community, have conducted your community needs assessment. If you have not yet done that process, I encourage you strongly to do a community needs assessment. We have a video on YouTube, so if you go to the nonprofit Utopia YouTube channel, you will see a video on how to conduct the community needs assessment. That's very, very important that you understand what's going on in your community so you'll know how to approach it. So this is something that I recommend that could cut light years off your program design process as well as your proposal development process. This is a program logic model. And what a program logic model does is it helps you to better conceptualize on one page, ideally, sometimes it may go for more than one page, how you see your community and how you see yourself addressing the problems in the community. So it starts off with looking at the situation, what's going on in your community as well as what's going on in the big picture. So when we look at the macro problems, we're looking at what's going on at the federal level and sometimes even our state level, what's happening with policy and other laws and all that stuff that could impact the work that we're trying to do. After that, we want to drill down to the local level, which is our local communities. It could be our local cities. And then we also want to look at what's going on with our organization and with our clients. So that will give us a snapshot, so to speak, as to what's going on in our communities. And given what's going on in our communities and at the macro level, all of this stuff that's going to impact our ability to do our work, then we develop goals and objectives. So we've done our situation analysis, we've created our goals and objectives. After that, we have to look at what our inputs are or what it is that we invest. So the inputs are basically those resources that we need in order to address the problems in our community. So we look at what we invest. This is what we already have. So this could be money in some cases, it could be staff time, it could be equipment and supplies. And then we look at what we're lacking or what we don't have at the time and what we need to get in order to make sure that we can meet our goals and objectives. So we acquire things like additional staff, expertise, and training for our staff. And then we look at who our target is, right? Who is it that we're trying to impact for the better? Is it our community? Is it a certain set of people within our community, say, for example, seniors or youth? And then we look at what it is we do. We offer programs and services. So programs are set up so that there's some intentionality about creating a change. There's intentionality, there's data and evidence to support what it is that we're trying to do. And then services, those are those things that we're doing. We know that they're good, but there's not necessarily any intentionality or what we would say goals and objectives to create change. So an example of that would be a food uh, pantry versus a diet. A food pantry is a service, because organizations tend to give out food, right? We know that food is good for the people that eat it, but there's usually no tracking mechanism to indicate whether or not there's been any change to the clients, right? They just document who showed up on that day, how much food they got, where they live, and that's about the extent of it. When you're on a diet, you are creating a situation or a program, so to speak. You have definite goals, you have objectives, you know what it is, the activities that you want to engage in, such as exercise, you know what foods you want to eat, and then you're going to measure changes, by your weight, or it could be things like your blood pressure or your blood sugar, right? And there's a definite intentionality about change because you want to bring your blood sugar down, you want to lower your blood pressure, you want to lower your weight, right? Whereas a soup kitchen, we just know that we're doing some good. We just haven't been intentional about measuring what that good is. And then we look at the outcomes. Oh, I'm sorry. So those activities, those are really the outputs, right? So the inputs are what goes into your programs, your resources. Your outputs are those activities, what it is that day-to-day thing that you're doing. And then the outcome is what's going to change as a result of all this activity, right? So how will our clients or community be impacted by our work on the short term, intermediate term, and long term? And then how we're going to evaluate it, right? And I like to do this because once I go through this exercise, it makes writing the program, it makes writing the proposal so much easier, because if you can just summarize what's going on in this diagram, you have cut light years off your time. And then you've also had a chance to think about how the different components interrelate with one another. And as a result, when you're responding to questions in your proposal, or if you're just developing blue, a boilerplate proposal for your own organization, you have everything before you rather than trying to write off the top of your head. And this is an example. And this is an example that was done for a supportive housing program. And you can see that their goal was to help stabilize formerly homeless individuals with co-occurring disorders by providing access to the service and tools needed to successfully live in supportive housing and or attain permanent housing. So they listed all the resources they needed, such as funding, case managers, clinicians, psychiatrists, etc. And then they looked at the activities or the outputs in which they would engage. And this shows, that's short for the name of the organization. So they want to make sure that they're training their team. They want to provide services in substance abuse, primary care, economic and housing support, motivational interviewing, and all of that stuff. I'm not going to give you the complete list, in the interest of time. And then they indicate what they want to happen in the short term, what they want to happen intermediate term, and what they want to happen on the long term. So, for example, in the short term, they expect to see increased knowledge and ability of the show's team to provide substance abuse, primary care, economic, and housing support. On an intermediate basis, they want to see that the first year clients are in the process of or have transitioned to more traditional housing and services, or are stable in long-term permanent supportive housing. And in the long term, they expect first year clients to have successfully completed the SHOWS program and have moved on to more traditional housing and services, or remain stable in long term permanent supportive housing. So, again, I'm not going to go through all of this in the interest of time, but once you can document that type of process for yourself, it's so much easier to write the proposal. All right, so we're going to go into the proposal basics right about now, and we'll start off with the definition of a proposal. So, a proposal is a written expression of a problem and how the organization proposes to address the problem. You have a needs assessment or a statement of the problem, and that's going to be used as the basis for the project or the program or the service. And it's also going to be used to make the case for funding, provide guidance for program development and evaluation. And the funding decisions are largely based on the organization's ability to carry out its mission. So, again, that goes back to what I was saying about capacity. When you develop your proposals, you need to also look at the capacity of the organization. You want to be able to develop a proposal that is within the realm of possibilities given where you are right now. So that's going to look different from your organization if you're starting up today. It'll look different 5 years from now. It'll look different 10 years from now based on where you are in your development. So basically, the funding process is, you want to generate an idea, and then you want to get funding. Then you want to refine the proposal and submit the proposal. You want to manage the grant and then conduct research. So that is an example from research. All right. And your typical components of a foundation proposal, and this is a foundation proposal, which is different from a public proposal from the state or the federal government. Typically, you want to have a cover letter. You'll talk about the problem. You'll give a problem statement. And we also recommend that when you talk about the problem, that you also talk about the assets, talk about it not necessarily from a position of weakness, but a position of strength. And you want to talk about the assets of the people and the community. Focus on what they have versus what they lack. You also want to include information on the organizational background, goals and objectives, methods, the budget, the evaluation, and sustainability, and the supplementary materials. Now that's going to vary, from place to place, but typically those are the basic components, wherever you go. And when we look at preparation, obviously you need to put first things first. You want to research the issues in your community. As I indicated before, a good place to start is with your community needs assessment. And we have a video in YouTube that you can use to go through this. And then you also want to get expert opinions. You want to also, depending on the impact of what your proposal could do, you want to conduct a public relations campaign to make sure that there's buy-in from the community and that there's awareness of what it is that you're trying to do, and you'll be able to hopefully recruit people into your programs or services. You also want to quantify the costs and identify the potential funding sources, and you want to establish relationships with key decision makers. And all of that stuff is very, very important because not only are funders looking at the proposals, the mechanics of the proposals, but they're also looking at your relationships in the community. Are you credible with the community, right? Do you have relationships with other providers in the community such that you can get the support that you need and leverage what you need and make a bigger impact? And then also, when you look at proposal writing, it is more or less project management. So it's not just writing. As I indicated before, you need to make sure you're managing a process. You need the resources, and typically the resources that you're going to need during the writing process will be other people. Other people who have the information that you need. So the first thing you want to do is look at all the requirements of the proposal before you do anything else. And anything you need to get from other people, you make sure you ask them first before you start writing, because the worst experience you can have is approaching a deadline and you hadn't reached out to other people to get what you need. And usually at that point, just because it's an emergency for you, your lack of organization or preparedness does not mean that it's an emergency for the other person. So make sure that you get what you need from other people up front. You want to make sure you have a point person or a project manager who is responsible for moving all the pieces and gathering all the information. You want to make sure you have a work team that has people with different backgrounds. So you want to make sure you have a program person, a finance person, a fundraising person, and other external partners who might be helping you with this project. And then you also want to make sure that you assign specific tasks to people so nothing falls between the cracks. And you want to make sure that you give people specific deadlines so that you have what you need to write the proposal and get it in time. And in addition to the application, you're going to need other documents, and that is typically things like a 501c3 letter from the IRS, letting them, well, providing evidence that you are tax exempt. You should also have your articles of incorporation, a certificate of good standing, and you can get that from the Secretary of State's office in the state of Illinois. You also want to have prepared your most recent audited statements and your most recent financial statements. And your financial statements typically are going to include your balance sheet, income statement, cash flow statement, and your annual report. Now, in many instances, especially if you're listening to me right now, you might be a startup organization and you may not necessarily have audited statements, and you might not even want to put money behind an audited statement right about now. In the absence of an audited statement, you can get a compilation by a CPA, an outside CPA, who will look at your financials and put them in a format that is what we would call generally acceptable accounting principles format that is commonly understood by foundations and any other financial or business person. And that gives an extra layer of comfort that someone from outside the organization has in fact prepared the documents. They're not audited, so they're not giving an opinion, but they have at least prepared them in a way that, a CPA would. And if you don't have the budget for that, then my next best alternative to share with you would be QuickBooks. And QuickBooks is an accounting package that will help you put your financials in an orderly format that will conform to generally accepted accounting principles, right? And even if you don't have QuickBooks, the next best alternative is to do an Excel spreadsheet, but you want to develop your financial statements in a way that conforms to generally accepted accounting principles. And if you have any questions at this point, please feel free to post, and I will get back to the questions, after the presentation. And here's another hint. You should treat grant writing as if as if you're going to be in a court of law. Only answer the question asked and only provide the information that's asked. Typically, they don't always ask for this stuff, but this is a list of things that could be asked for, in the process. Your IRS Form 990, and for the state of Illinois, your AG 990IL, that will be comparable. It's not a tax return, it's an information return, but it's comparable to doing a 1040 and your 1040 IL, right? So it's the state and federal return. You might be asked to provide media articles, resumes, or bios of your key personnel or board members, architectural drawings if you're doing a capital project, letters of support, and then other kinds of documents, particularly if you're working on a large project. They might want certifications, disclosures. They want to know how you're using minority businesses or women-owned businesses or disadvantaged businesses. Sometimes they want to know about people with disabilities and veterans. And then they also might ask for a work plan. Again, only give them what they ask for. Otherwise, you're opening the door to, Pandora's box, right? And when I say Pandora's box, they might ask you questions that you hadn't anticipated. All right. So when we look at the organization background, this could include things like your mission, vision, and core values. You could talk about your history. You can talk about your capabilities. And you can demonstrate capabilities in a number of ways. You could talk about past projects that were similar. You could talk about the experience of your board members in that type of project. You could talk about certifications. You could talk about, the resumes, and whatever responses you give, you always want to highlight those experiences that are relevant to the project that you're trying to get funded, right? It's, just like doing a resume. You want to shift your resume so that so you're highlighting the skills and experiences that are most relevant to that one job that you're looking for. So you do the same thing with your proposals. So the first thing we want to talk about is addressing community needs. And before we do that, we want to step back and look at all 6 steps to writing a better funding proposal. So at the base of the pyramid is your statement of need. Everything is flowing from your statement of need. You want to be able to demonstrate your knowledge of the issues as to what's going on in the community, but that's not the place where you're giving a solution, but you're just describing the lay of the land. You're describing the players, you're describing the problems, you're describing the issues, and you have the data and the stories to back it up, right? And then the next thing is, given what's going on in the community, what are your goals and what are your objectives? And then your methods, how are you going to meet your goals and objectives? And then next we look at how you're going to evaluate whether or not your work has been successful. And you want to be able to do that before you even begin the work, develop a plan for evaluation. And then you want to look at the budget. And then at the top of the pyramid is sustainability. So that's ongoing, making sure that your organization can last and stand the test of time. All right, so the first step is writing the proposal need statement. All right, so Obviously, you want to look at the needs that your particular organization is trying to address. So you want to describe a critical condition or set of circumstances impacting a targeted group at a specific point in time. And so notice too that over time your needs statement may change, because communities change. And then you also want to make sure that whatever need you're highlighting has a direct relationship to your organization's mission and purpose. And it also has a direct relationship to the prospective funders' mission and purpose. Because funders are not going to fund projects that are outside of their mission. They're actually looking at your organization as a partner. How can you and the foundation partner to solve problems in the community? So it's really important that the people that you approach have similar mission and vision. All right. So also you should know that the mission and purpose, those are critical for your case for support. And again, we focused on the case for support last week. I encourage you strongly to go to the Nonprofit Utopia YouTube channel, subscribe to that channel so that you don't miss any of our videos. And you can also look at, a number of our videos. I think we have over 70 videos that you can look at. And one of the videos focuses on the needs assessment as well as the case for support. All right. So you want to focus on needs of the clients and the community versus your own organization. And the only time you're really focusing on the needs of the organization is when you're applying for funds to do what we call capacity building. And capacity building is basically those activities that you engage in to make sure that your organization is stronger and it's more impactful and it can serve more people and really, really make a difference in the community. So if you're engaging in those types of activities and you need funding for it, that's the only time that you will focus on the organization in a proposal. Otherwise, it needs to be community focused and client focused. All right. And then you also, as I indicated before, whenever you talk about the needs, you need to be able to back up the needs, right? You need to have facts, statistics, expert testimony, human interest stories, case studies, etc. You don't necessarily need all of this. In fact, you're not even going to be given enough space to provide all of that. But you want to be able to provide sufficient evidence, right, that there is in fact a need. And it's really important too, and I think what really helps is if the organization has had experience where they've collected data that no one else has. You might have done this through a survey of some sort. You might have collected data from your program and you've been able to analyze the data that gives you a unique perspective on a problem. And that's always, always good to include in your needs assessment. It's always good to cite other sources, but it's even better to cite those sources and say, well, what we have found in our experience is XYZ. All right. So here is a sample statement of need. And I'm going to read this to you. As the economy continues to decline and the state cuts services for seniors, they're finding themselves unable to remain safely and affordably in their homes, which is the preferred option for most seniors over a nursing home and more cost effective for society. According to Aging and Independent Services, 20% of seniors have serious concerns about finding affordable home care services. Of the seniors surveyed, 35% lived alone and nearly 40% felt they did not have enough money to live on. Activities seniors rated as difficult or unable to complete included housework, shopping, preparing meals, and assessing transportation. Not assessing, accessing, I'm sorry. These services are not just inaccessible, But then to the UCLA Centers for Health, centers in San Diego will pay on average $519 per month or $6,228 annually for just 6 hours of services and phone support from a case manager. So you can see that this is a very well documented statement of need. They've been able to give you a very broad statement at the top and then give you supporting evidence in the bullet points below. So your organization needs to demonstrate the ability to address the needs in the manner prescribed. And not only that, you want to provide a sense of urgency and indicate, what the alternatives are and what the consequences are if those needs aren't met and if they're not, if they're not funded for you to be able to address those needs. And you want to focus the explanation of need on the service area that you want to serve and the impacts of resolving the problem. So if you're based in North Lawndale, your focus should be North Lawndale, assuming that's what your stated target area is. You don't want to talk about how you're going to serve the city of Chicago if your target geography is just one community. All right, so the next thing we want to focus on is goals and objectives. And the goal is basically a broad-based statement of the ultimate result, right? So, for example, the homebound elderly in Maine County will live with dignity and independence in their own homes. All right, so it's just a broad statement. And then we have objectives that will support that. So, a goal basically tells you what it is that you want to do, right? And then an objective tells you how you're going to do it. All right. And ideally, both the goal and the objective should be SMART. And they don't necessarily have to be, but in an ideal way. So that should be measurable, time specific. It should be achievable, I believe realistic and timely. That's what SMART stands for. So in this approach, we're using the goal as a broad sweeping statement, and then we're going to talk about how we achieve those goals, and our objectives, basically tell us how we're going to do that. And you have outcome objectives as well as all right, so the outcome objectives are going to tell you what's going to change versus a process objective, and we'll talk about that. It's going to focus more on your activities, right? So your outcome objective, for example, there will be a 5% decrease in the number of frail older adults entering convalescent homes during the first year of the social services referral program. So you can see that that's a SMART objective, is measurable, right? And it tells you when it's going to occur. So it's measurable, it's got a deadline, and we're assuming that this is within the capacity of the organization that's making the proposal. And then you have process objectives, as I indicated before. It's basically talking about, I guess, the nuts and bolts. And in this case, it's talking about a method for achieving the goal. So in this case, we're talking about an increase in social services referrals and follow-up for 75% of the individuals served by the Meals Consortium during the grant year. So again, the process is basically focusing on activities, and the outcome objectives are focusing on what's going to change. So I indicated before, SMART goals and objectives. Again, they're specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and timely or time bound. All right, so specific, when you make your goals, you want to be able to state exactly what it is you want to accomplish. So that's the who, the what, the where, And the why, you want to make sure that it's measurable. And as you think about the measurable, you have to think about how you're going to demonstrate and evaluate the extent to which the goal has been met. And is it achievable? You want something that is going to stretch you and be challenging, but you still want to make sure that it's within your own capability. And is it relevant? How does, and in some cases, people say, is it realistic? So, depending on your source. So, in this case, is it relevant? How does the goal tie into your key responsibilities? And how is it aligned to the objective? So, everything builds upon one another, right? And you want to have consistency in terms of what it is you're trying to achieve. Your goals and objectives need to be consistent with your needs assessment. And then finally, it needs to have an expiration date, time bound. So you want to set one or more target dates, so the by when, to guide your goal to successfully and timely completing it. And then you want to include timelines, dates, and frequency. And when we talk about frequency, that's how often you do it. So some programs are repetitive. You might run more than one cycle of a program. All right, so here's some helpful hints on writing goals and objectives. Goals and objectives should be related to the need statement and guided by the overall mission of the organization. And the best proposals include both process and outcome objectives. So the process, again, you're talking about the method, and then the outcome is talking about what's going to change. And then your objectives should be SMART. So now we want to talk about the methods. So basically, the methods are going to describe, you know, how you're going to achieve your goals and objectives. So they describe the programs, the services and activities of an organization, and how they're going to be used to achieve the goals and objectives in the proposal. So there needs to be alignment through and through. The methods should be consistent with the goals and objectives and the need statement. And they need to describe how the organization is going to meet the objectives, and they're going to identify who's going to be served and the rationale for selection. So that's basically your target population, who you're going to serve, and why you selected that particular target versus another target. And then you want to indicate what facilities and or capital equipment you're going to use. And in this age of COVID, it may not necessarily all take place within a certain facility. It may be virtual, and you need to be able to describe the virtual environment. All right. And then you need to also give the rationale for the methods that you choose. If there is a model that you're trying to replicate, and when I say replicate, you're trying to duplicate it or do the same thing, but make sure you're tailoring it to your specific community. Then you want to be able to cite those models, right? And then you want to talk about how your methodology or the way you do things are similar or different from other models. And then you want to be able to cite the research or the expert opinion or past experience. And in a really strong case, if you've done some work that's been cutting edge, if you can cite your own experience, that is really, really powerful. And then you want to talk about the implementation plan. And so when we talk about implementation, how are you going to actually get this done? So you spent the first part of the proposal talking about the problem, your goals and objectives, and how you're going to address it. But here you're going to talk about not only how you're going to address it, but you want to talk about your plan, your nuts and bolts plan for the activities that you're going to engage in to actually make this program a reality. All right, so you're going to include your timeline. So for every task in your timeline, you're going to list out all the things that need to be done, but you're going to also list who's responsible, and then you're going to list the deadline, and whoever is the project manager is going to be the one holding people accountable. And you'll also indicate to the resources that you'll need. And evaluation, I find that the evaluation is a very tricky part of the proposal, because evaluation means different things to different people, but basically you want to be able to demonstrate, does this program work, right? And it's always best to think about how you're going to prove a program works before you actually develop the program itself. The worst experience you can ever have, or one of the worst experiences you can have, is to have your program evaluated and you didn't think through your evaluation planning process, and as a result you're scrambling trying to find data, right? So you want to make sure that you can have a good program evaluation plan, and you want to be able to describe that plan. So program evaluation is going to be a narrative section where you're talking about the effectiveness and the efficiency and of the project, right? And then you also want to be able to talk about the steps you're going to take so that you can have a really good evaluation. So that will include things like, what is it that you are trying to find, right? You want to be able to demonstrate, what you should be able to see if your program is in fact effective, right? And you want to talk about the data you're going to collect, who's going to collect it, by when, and how that data is going to be used, and how that data is going to be used to support whether or not your program is effective. All right, so that's all with outcome evaluation. With process evaluation, you're basically focusing on the nuts and bolts of your program. So you want to look at the activities, right? So you want to look at the types and quantities of services delivered, who benefited, what resources you used, what problems you encountered in delivering the product and service. You're not necessarily focusing at this point on whether or not any change has occurred. You just are looking to work out the kinks in the program so that you can, in fact, deliver a program that's going to make change. So your outcome evaluation is going to focus on the results. So it's going to really focus on whether or not you're able to reach those outcomes that you identified in your proposal. So you're going to look at what happened to program participants and how much of a difference the program made to them. And you want to be able to not only look at how much of a difference the program made, but you want to be able to say specifically, what specific things in your program caused this change, so that there's no doubt that your program is effective. Sometimes our target market or clients, sometimes they achieve results, but we can't necessarily say that it was directly as a result of our programs. All right. So next, we want to focus on the budget, and this is, another problematic area. One of the problems that many people have, they may say one thing in the narrative, but then when you look at the budget, they may not necessarily capture, everything that they said in the narrative, right? So basically, your budget is the numeric translation of everything that you put in, the front part, the story part of the narrative, right? So you want to be able to quantify the activities and the method section, and the budget period should last for the duration of the project. So if it's a 6-month project, then you have a 6-month budget. If it's a 1-year project, then you need a 1-year budget. And you want to make sure you have projected revenue, which is the money coming in, And then you want to make sure that you have the expenses. And then you want to also account for in-kind donations. So if there are people who are donating labor, donating office space or whatever, you want to be able to put a value to that. And that also strengthens your application. So here is a sample budget, and this is not related to any of the other exercises and any of the other examples that I shared. This is something that I developed for another proposal writing course that I developed. All right. So in this case, we're looking at the projected revenues. They're thinking that they're going to get $100,000 from foundations and $20,000 from contributions through their annual giving campaign, $10,000 from their annual fundraiser, and that's their dinner. Um, they expect to bring in $20,000 from fees that they get from consulting for other organizations. And then they think they're going to get a $25,000 community development block grant. So all of that for $180,000. So when we look at how that money is spent, we we see that salaries are 100,000, and then we see that employee benefits are 25,000. Looking at $18,000 for office rent, and I'm not going to go through all of these line items in the interest of time, but basically the way this is set up, you look at all of the activities that you said that you were going to do, and then you kind of list those out, and then you figure out what resources you need, and you do a laundry list of the resources and how much it's going to cost. So obviously you're going to need people. So people could include salaries and benefits. Another resource you might need is office space. How much is that going to cost? Office equipment. How much is that lease for? You're going to need copies. How much does that cost? So it's a whole lot like going grocery shopping. What's your laundry list and how much you think it's going to cost? And then this area here is a justification, right? So salaries of $100,000, that includes the executive director, full-time at $50,000, a program coordinator at $30,000, and an administrative assistant at $20,000. Okay, so, and these are just hypothetical numbers. It's not based on an actual situation, but I just thought that this might be helpful. And you notice here, the revenue is equal to the expenses. If there was a difference, then that will show here. All right, so the last thing is sustainability, meaning in this case, so if you're a funder, they want to know that once they give you money that you're going to be around beyond the life cycle of their grant. So if they're giving you a grant for 2 years, they want to make sure that you're going to be around longer than 2 years, because they may not be with you after 2 years is up, right? So it's really important that you can share how you're going to survive beyond that grant, right? And they want to be able to spread the risk. So it's going to be basically, how you're going to be able to carry on in the long term. So sustainability planning, there's a lot more to it than just looking at other resources. It's also, it's looking at future funding, but it's also looking at strategic planning and business planning and making sure that your organization is structured appropriately. So when we look at future funding, this could entail renewing existing grants. It could be fees for services, so, your organization may be able to consult other organizations. You might be able to develop some publication that you can sell to other organizations. Future funding could be annual campaigns. Um, Then we also look at business planning. If your organization has a business venture, um, you can look at, whether or not there is feasibility of those products and services. So you might have a real estate venture, right? Or you might have a, a venture that you have developed an app or whatever app. So you might want to do a business plan for that and see how much money can be generated. And after, you know, all the expenses from that venture are paid off, how can that money, in fact, be plowed back into the organization? And again, strategic planning. You want to make sure that you are positioning your organization for changes. Nobody could have ever predicted what's going on now with this COVID-19, but you also want to make sure that your organization is positioned for change and is also positioned where they can respond to change. So that's part of the sustainability equation. And if you're doing a social venture where you're actually creating a new organization that's going to be affiliated or controlled by your organization, you need to make sure that you have the right business structure. So that could be a 501c3, another tax exempt organization. It could be a hybrid of an LLC. So it could be an LLC, which is a limited liability corporation, or a hybrid between a corporation and an LLC, which would be basically a low profit organization. It is a for profit, but they are in business for social purpose, and the social mission takes precedence over making money, but they don't necessarily want to be a 501c3. All right, so if you have any questions, I'm going to check that out now. Feel free to post and I will respond accordingly. All right. Okay, so comments. All righty. We have a question from Leslie. Primary research is valuable. Thanks, Leslie. Did you want to, if you're still here, did you want to expound on that? I would agree with you, but can you expound? And if anyone there also has any questions, please feel free to post. Any comments or questions before we go? I want to make sure that I respond to everybody. If you are a member of the nonprofit Utopia community, remember you can sign up for office hours. All right. And we did post in the community. And if there is anyone out there in need of fundraising coaching, you can be sure to email me at ValerieFLeonard@nonprofitutopia.com, and I can send you a link and we can schedule coaching sessions. And those coaching sessions for members, those are $40 for every half hour. And for non-members, those are $75 for every half hour. Okay, it looks like we don't have any more comments or questions. So that being the case, I'm going to sign off now. I want to say thank you so much for joining us. If you have any questions, you can email me at ValerieFLeonard@nonprofitutopia.com. You can post in the comment section and I can look at it afterwards. And then I want to ask you to make sure that you join us tomorrow. We're going to have Cyron Smith, the founder of National Block Club University. He will be here tomorrow afternoon at 1 o'clock. He's going to talk about his journey in developing National Block Club University and making sure that he impacts not only communities like North Lawndale, but communities around the nation and, in fact, communities around the world. Oh, you're quite welcome, Deborah. Thank you so much for joining us. We really, really appreciate it. All righty. So without further ado, I'm going to end the broadcast now, and I thank everybody for joining us. Take care. Bye-bye.